Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Shared Services Link and sponsored by TradeShift. We are also running this webinar in partnership with Vizeo. Today, we'll be looking at how L'Oreal is transforming accounts payable. My name is Sarah Fain, and I am the head of research at Shared Services Link, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Denise Shaw, who's the AVP of Accounts Payable Shared Services at L'Oreal USA, and Emmanuel Dever, who's the USA Managing Director and CEO of Vizeo USA. You, of course, have a very important role to play in today's webinar too, and that is to make sure that you get the most out of this webinar. Please use this opportunity to send us your questions, and the best way to do so is using the chat functionality, which is usually over on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you submit questions to us, we'll be able to take them at the end of the webinar, which is usually about the last 10 or 15 minutes of the session. You'll, of course, want a copy of the slides. These will be sent to everybody who has registered for the webinar today, and they are also available on our website, www.sharespace.digital. So let's just look at the agenda for today. I'll open up briefly with a little bit of introduction and context. We also want to learn a little bit more about who's on the webinar with us today, so we have a poll question. But we'll be spending the majority of the webinar looking at transforming accounts payable at L'Oreal, their drivers for change, insights into the implementation, the benefits from automation, and importantly, some tips and advice. And again, we'll be able to take your questions in about the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So L'Oreal is a company that doesn't need much introduction. They are the world's largest cosmetics company and a household name. Today, we'll be looking at how they implemented technology to transform the accounts payable department. So we'll be focusing on how they implemented an AP solution, how it's transforming their operations, and insight and what you can learn from their journey. So before we dive into this, I would just like to launch our poll question for today. And we want to understand, where are you on your automation journey? Are you looking to automate AP in the next year, perhaps in the next 2 years? Are you looking to expand your e-invoicing program? Are you looking to implement supply chain finance? Or would you say that you are happy with your current levels of automation? So really just to get a sense of where you are on this journey. It's great to see lots of you participating. We already have about 60% of you voting. So I'll be closing the poll in 3, 2, 1, and we've got 70% of you participating. So let's just have a quick look at those results. And about half of you say that you are 45% are looking to further automate in the next 12 months, 18% in the next 2 years, 23% are looking at improving e-invoicing, only 9% looking at supply chain finance, and a fortunate 5% are happy with how things are and with their levels of automation, which is great to hear. So let's just close that down. Great, and there we are. So now I would like to bring in Denise Shaw from L'Oreal. And Denise, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your role at L'Oreal?
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. I'm the accounts payable manager, AVP of the Shared Service Center. And currently I sit in the accounting department in New Jersey. So we structured our shared services department approximately 10 years ago, and we were separated in 2 different locations in New Jersey. So I headed up the AP team in South Brunswick, and the accounting team sat in Berkeley Heights. 2 years ago, we restructured, we relocated our accounts payable department to Florida, as well as part of our accounting team. So we do remain as one team, both North and South. And I maintain some of the responsibilities that I had previously when I was heading up the AP team. So I still handle all the Concur, the corporate card program administration, T&E, travel. I have a lot of focus today on projects, and I'm the liaison between really the business and the AP Shared Services Center. I was part of all of the automation that we've rolled out over the years, and I continue to hopefully bring some enhancements and new projects and technology to the shared services team in Florida.
That's great. Thanks, Denise. And we have Visay on the line with us today. I'll bring in Emmanuel shortly, but would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Viseo?
Absolutely. Visio has been a longtime partner of L'Oreal USA as well as L'Oreal France. So we often bring in Visio and contract with them on larger projects. So I've had the pleasure of working with Emmanuel and his team over the years on many, many different projects. And there's many more that I wasn't even a part of. So I can think back to even Concur. We implemented Concur, a new version a couple of years ago that was worldwide. So we had Concur in-house in the US. So we're very advanced, and we decided to roll that out worldwide. So we brought Visio in to manage this. So not only their technical expertise, they understand our systems, very familiar with everything we do, but they bring a level of that project management that is sometimes, in my opinion, difficult to achieve from an internal person. They have more leverage coming from the outside to organize the cross-functional parties, to get things done in a more timely manner. And like I said, it's been a very successful partnership over the years with Visio. They worked with us on all of this AP automation as we went through this, and it took us a few years to do this segment by segment, but Visio has been by our side the entire time, and even post-implementation, they're there for support. So thank you, Emmanuel, for that.
Well, thank you, Denise. So as you said, I mean, we've been working with L'Oreal for the past 20 years. And so Visio is an IT consulting company, and we provide technical expertise for sure, but we also provide project management. And so we are in a position to coordinate different teams with different technologies. We partner with the biggest software editors. And so that's how we basically implemented SAP, Readsoft, SAP Concur, and Redshift at L'Oreal. So it's been a pleasure. And once again, our approach is to tailor-made the team, making sure that coordination goes well, because it's a key success factor for this kind of AP project.
That's great. Well, thank you, Denise and Emmanuel. So Denise, I was hoping you could give us a little bit of color about where you were before automation. I know you have some great things to show about your journey and where you are now, but what would you say were some of your key drivers for automating accounts payable?
When I think about the benefits of automation or e-invoicing, that's what we refer to it as, I think it depends on where you sit. Right, so if you're a CFO, you're looking at the hard dollar savings, procurement's looking for a better relationship with suppliers, and automation's going to deliver a whole host of benefits for the entire organization. And I have to say, just looking at the graphic on this slide, Sarah, is perfect, because all I see is paper. And one of the things that was promised with AP automation was to go paperless. And it was like a dream, a distant dream to be paperless, because what did that mean? My desk looked like this. You know, I had 40-something AP processors who were just buried in paper. And I'm sure everyone on the phone who is in the AP space suffers from the same thing. You're just buried in paper. And when I think back, I had 1 to 1.5 heads really opening mail on a daily basis. So every day they're trucking off to the mail room, coming back with totes, big mail totes. And on a Monday morning, it was not uncommon for them to come back with 3, 4, 5 totes of mail that then, of course, had to be opened. The supplies that we had, you know, we had electronic openers and staplers and stamps. And it was a whole process that was pretty much their full-time job. Very routine, very boring, very inefficient. And then from there, as that mail was opened, it was separated by alpha and then by company, different segments. and distributed. So I remember purchasing this big mailbox with slots. So then these clerks would have to send off all of the pieces of mail to the individual processors who would then retrieve them. And then what happened from there? The processors would go and get their mail. They are stamping it with the date that they've received it, because if an audit comes, you have to be able to possibly track some of this information, and just ultimately buried in paper, which bogged down the process. So after you got done with your daily mail and sort, then it was time to process some invoices. So just imagine all of the time lost on this useless, really low level task. So that to me was very intriguing. I have to say that I don't think anyone is ever completely paperless, but certainly there's been big improvement there. And the other thing that I would like to call out, in addition to what's on the slide too, is the visibility. So you now can see where your invoices are, how they're flowing through the system. They're not buried in a mailbox or a mail tote or the mailroom or on someone's desk.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And I think that imagery of all those tote bags is just making my shoulder hurt just thinking about it. So do you now just be able to expand a bit more on the technology that you implemented and how it worked with the other systems that you had in place?
Sure. I think to understand the implementation, it's best to give a little background. So we are an SAP shop. We have automated in, I'll call it 3 different segments. So when we're running 3 different instances of SAP. So we have our manufacturing end. We have our commercial piece, again, two separate SAPs. And in manufacturing, I have 7 companies within that SAP. In the commercial, we have 2 different companies. And then more recently, we have brought on Canada. So just imagine that all 3 of these areas have different components, different rules, and we even have different back-end PO systems. So we run SRM. So any of you who are on SAP are probably familiar with SRM, Supplier Relationship Management System. In the manufacturing space, we create purchase orders directly in R3. This is important when you think about implementation, because you're going to mimic or even improve some of the rules that you have today. For us, the PO, and I think for any AP automation, the PO is your unique identifier. That's something that you need to flow through the entire system from beginning to end, from supplier all the way to payment. One of the things that we changed in our system when we brought about the AP automation was in our SRM PO module, the buyers were revealed the purchase order number as soon as they started a PO. We changed that after the fact, that they did not get their purchase order number until the PO was fully approved. Again, this is key as you're using this unique identifier to flow all the way through the system. And then each one of these segments had different flows. So again, going from the supplier, you need to get the information and design how the data goes from A to B, or from vendor to AP to payment. And we had to involve, of course, our IT teams. You can't do anything without your IT teams. But it's somewhat complex with this implementation, because you have the FICO teams who are coming in and providing this referential data back to your third party, whether it's TradeShift or another third party e-invoicing provider, right, to attain those purchase order numbers. We involve the global scape teams and the PI or portal interface teams. So who's grabbing these data flows as they're coming in and converting them into a language that's readable and understandable by SAP? How is that translation, is that done? So these teams are very, very important to the flow of the data to make sure it's solid. There's also back-end tables in SAP that have to be monitored, populated, created, if you will, to make sure there's mapping and continuity in these flows. When I think about some of the other systems, Visio helped us build a work cycle tool. I should back up a little bit. There's first a reads-off cockpit. So as all of this information flows in, right, AP is no longer dealing with paper. It lands in a queue, which we designed as the reads-off cockpit. This is AP's workbench, if you will, and where they will go in and they will do all their processing, and they see everything proposed, if you will, and the information in the system ready to be treated. Visio also helped us create a work cycle. So it's a workflow tool that helps with communication. So as invoices come in to this queue, this reads-off cockpit where AP is treating them, in a perfect world, if the purchase order is there and there's a three-way match, everything goes through. But if there needs to be some communication back to the buyer, how does that happen? So this work cycle tool was implemented as a communication vehicle back to the buyers, and it works beautifully. It also serves as a repository for all of our invoice images. So if we need to contact a buyer for any reason, it goes through this tool. They have notes from accounts payable. They have specific workflows and titles that were designed in the build phase, and they have the invoice image. So they can respond back to accounts payable to provide all of the necessary information that AP needs to post that particular invoice. The other thing that we focused on, and I guess I'll touch on it more later, is when we did our implementation, we did it slowly. So we started with one segment, and we started with the top 20 vendors. And it was the top 20 vendors that had the most volume of invoices. So we had too many vendors to do at one time, and we took it in a slow phased approach so that we could concentrate and make sure that this pilot was really working well before we ramped up. The other thing that we focused on was, even after the build and the tool was there and ready to go, you then had the supplier onboarding. So that to me always sounded like a very simple phase, but it was really a critical phase as well. Getting the the suppliers to understand the change, what was happening. And in the next slide, I'll go through the flow and the different types of acquisitions and vehicles or channels for us to get invoices. But it was key for these suppliers to understand what was happening, choose their correct channel to be onboarded. And then the final focus was we spend a lot of time training the buyers and accounts payable as well on these tools. And this is the slide now that you're seeing on, we call it the acquisition mode. So at L'Oreal, we have about 80% of our invoices that go through one of these 4 channels, which is hosted by TradeShift or the e-invoicing platform. I do have about 20% of our invoices that don't go through any of this. We really call it AP Direct. We don't key many invoices, but there are certainly a population of invoices that don't lend themselves as well to an e-invoicing platform. For instance, rents. I have close to 2,000 purchase orders that create the rent vouchers each month, and they're automatic. So obviously there's no reason for it to go through any kind of platform. We do a lot of tax uploads, and we have some key vendors who are very large where we do what we call an e-upload or a special upload directly into SAP. So aside from that, everyone else falls into one of these 4 areas. So when I start at the top, there's an EDI channel, all right? Our larger vendors, or this is targeted really for larger vendors. So if they have more than 100 invoices a month, EDI most likely is the best channel for them. Why? So the EDI channel starts out electronic. The 810 files flow directly from the vendor through TradeShift into SAP. This requires some technical resources and abilities on the supplier's end. So it's not really for everyone, but in my opinion, it's the most accurate and best for accounts payable. It's virtually hands-off, right? In order for them to put an EDI file in, they already have to have all of the unique information, the purchase order, the vendor, all of that information up front. So there's very little chance of mistake for the invoice integration. The next part is Smart PDF. So again, for a little bit, vendors that have a little less volume, and I don't want you to get confused by the word PDF, because this is almost a template where fields are populated by the vendor and then imported. So again, it's much more accurate. The information is there, but it's a little more labor intensive on the supplier part. The third is the web portal. So for some very small mom and pop vendors, they can go right onto the TradeShift portal, key in their invoice, and it's sent off to L'Oreal. So very few are on that. Again, EDI, in my opinion, is the best. When we first analyzed this, we knew that we could not get everyone on one of these 3 channels right from the beginning. So we brought in Canon Osei, who's actually a partner of TradeShift, for the scanning component. And that's where we currently have about 77% of our invoices go through Canon. And that could either be snail mail, which is very little right now, maybe about 3%. But the rest is emailed directly to Canon as a PDF. And we have different mailboxes and different email addresses depending on the segment, because you want to make sure that the invoices are directed to the correct ReadSoft cockpit, to the correct company, to the correct segment. But Canon has been a wonderful partner as well. So the invoice goes to Canon. They are scanning and OCRing that data. Again, the referential files that we push to them, which contain the purchase order number and all of the other metadata files, are used to match and map and provide invoice data that then gets pushed through TradeShift and into our SAP cockpit. So hopefully that explains the main channels, and again, we call those the acquisition modes.
That's great. Thank you so much. We also have some information here about the implementation project scope. I know, Denise, you mentioned quite a lot of this flow before, but this might be a good time, Emmanuel, if you could bring you in here and just talk a little bit more about the project scope and the different technologies within the automation efforts.
Sure. So this is more a technical view of the actual project. So as Denise mentioned before, so the backbone of the AP automation process is SAP for sure, but all the accounting integration and the three-way match. But also very close from SAP, you find some ReadSoft tools, which are cockpit, where basically we get the invoice and compare the invoices with what we already have in SAP in the purchase order and good receipts. And we also have Process Director, which is the workflow. So we make sure that if there is a need for some approval workflows, we direct that to the right person with the right information as well. And for the acquisition of all the invoices, as Dennis mentioned before, so we can clearly see here TradeShift and how the invoices are flowing into TradeShift, either from the EDI or the smart PDF. And also from the paper invoice or the PDF directly to Canon. And so our role in the project was to actually provide expertise on the SAP side, so on the MM and the FI modules, but also on the ReadSoft applications, which are cockpit and so Process Director and for the cockpit and the workflows. And also on top of that, as I said before, the project management, so coordination of those technical teams working closely as well with the business. And so the project management was delivered and done locally here in the US, so working closely with Dennis and her team. And our technical team expertise were delivered from different delivery centers we have across the group. But basically the key success for the project was to make sure all those different teams actually work together and work efficiently as well. So this is the most, let's say, technical view of it.
That's great. Thanks for that deep dive, Emmanuel. That's really helpful to understand how those different technologies are working together. So Denise, I'd like to come back to you, and I'd love to hear a bit more about some of the benefits that you've seen at L'Oreal from this automation.
Sure, we've definitely received some benefits from these projects and from automation. And number one, let me just back up and say that it's a continuous process. I don't feel like you just implement and it's done. So there's always enhancements. But what we've seen definitely is increase in our productivity. And I just want to say it depends on how you measure as well. So obviously a common measurement is invoices per FTE. And I think every company may look at that a little bit different. So, what do you consider an FTE and how are you calculating that? Are you including management? Are you only including data entry processors? Is it half a head? Is it a full head? I think as long as you're consistent and keep your same methodology, obviously you'll be able to measure your progress. But we've definitely seen our number of invoices per FTE increase, but it also depends on each segment. So for those of you in accounts payable, I think you'll understand that not every invoice is the same. Not every invoice is equal. I may have an invoice that is a one-line to a one-line purchase order. It's very simple. There's never a problem. I may have invoices like we have in our salon-centric arena where the invoice and the PO both are 100 lines. So even with automation, it helps, but you're going to spend a little more time on that. But our commercial area, we're pushing probably up to about 17,000 invoices per FTE. So we've seen probably across the board like a 15 to 20% increase in productivity. The manufacturing side, we're getting close to about 20,000 invoices per FTE. Canada is terrible, so we just took them on recently. They have a lot of business processes that need to be changed and things that have to happen within the system and the buyers to increase this number. But for instance, they have a flag on in their system that says you can't post an invoice until the receipt is there. So for your typical three-way match, we don't operate like that in any other segment of the business, but that stops accounts payable from processing. So we definitely have some productivity wins. There's visibility into the team performance, which we never had before. There was no way to measure, if you go back to the paper scenario, no way to measure where your invoices were at. Were they in the mailboxes? We had a rule way back then where AP was not allowed to put their invoices inside the desk, keep them on the desk, but still it required a supervisor to go around and look to even gauge whether or not we had a backlog. It was very difficult. We can now see every invoice. So again, our main channel is Canon. Canon scans and puts those invoices into our cockpit within 24 hours. So at any time, we can go into the ReadSoft cockpit and see if there's a backlog. Our SLA is 3 days, so every invoice must be processed within 3 days. So was it touched? Is it sitting there? Is it still at a red light? Are the teams behind and why? It also keeps track of those workflow triggers. We call them parked invoices in our SAP world. So if there's no purchase order or we need something from a buyer, so it's kicked off, you could see how many are sitting in that particular queue or that status. It's excellent. You can also then measure not how quickly, but even the date the invoice is received into the cockpit versus the document date. So do you have delays there? It gives us a lot of visibility. There's simplicity, there's standardization. We can cross-train much easier too. And there's backup coverage because everyone's working from the same cockpit. They may sort it by alpha or different filters, but the procedures are the same and there's visibility for everyone. One thing to mention, most of our terms at L'Oreal are net 30. We don't usually extend or work on cash discounts except for in this salon-centric realm. And this is where today we have most of our EDI channel, and that has helped us achieve our cash discounts, actually earned cash discounts, because we're able to push everything through just a little bit faster. And then finally, I just have to say the accuracy. So anytime that you have a person who is keying, they're prone to mistakes. It's going to happen. This has reduced the data processing, the manual keying. AP is still reviewing the majority of the invoices. We want to make sure that the OCR scan is capturing properly, but the number of keystrokes is obviously greatly reduced, and our accuracy is improving. We don't have to worry so much about invoice naming convention, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So how does the system detect duplicates if you're not consistent? So it's coming in, what you see is what you get. And again, that has really helped with our accuracy tremendously.
Well, that's great. That's really great insight. And thanks so much for sharing those benefits and those percentages as well. That's really helpful to see. You mentioned, you're still very much on a journey. It'd be great to hear a little bit more about where you're hoping to be maybe the next 12 months or so in accounts payable.
We are on a journey, and really the enhancements, improvements, they never really end. So today we have really only about 2% on EDI. The majority of that comes from the salon-centric. So my goal is we need to onboard more suppliers. Why? Our ultimate goal right now is to improve our pay on time. And how do we do that? Right? There's many components, but one of the biggest components is getting those invoices in, getting them in quickly, ensuring there's no backlog from AP. Again, monitoring tools, we can see that. We have to work on our master data. So I had mentioned that, we have 2,000 or so purchase orders for rent. When you deal with rent, and frankly for us, a lot of vendors, we have payment terms in our system as due upon receipt. So if you're trying to improve your pay on time, you cannot achieve a due upon receipt, right? You can't pay the same day you get an invoice. So those invoices will always be considered late. So we are going to focus on our master data. We're going to focus on onboarding more vendors to the EDI channel to get the invoices in faster. We're going to focus on backlog, ensuring that AP is processing those on time. We are going to focus on our buyers. So to be totally transparent, we have, I'll say, a compliance issue with our buyers. We have to ensure that they're raising purchase orders on time. They're respecting the full P2P process. Because if they have not done their job, what happens? It falls on accounts payable. Invoices can't be paid on time, and it's almost considered a bad mark for accounts payable, but these are tasks and responsibilities that really are not the responsibility of accounts payable. So again, it's the pay on time is really where we're going to be focusing on.
That's great. That's some really great goals that you have there. And, whilst we have you on this webinar, I just love to dig a little bit more in the how to get there and what improvements you think you need to see to make sure that you achieve these goals.
Yeah, I think education is where we need to focus. So, I kind of mentioned the buyers. I think they, they're trying to do a good job. They want to do and respect the rules, but frankly, they were hired to do something else, not really raise purchase orders in most cases. So we recently went to a new purchasing module, if you will. We're calling it My Market. It's another version of SRM, so there's a lot of bells and whistles that I think are going to help them. But we are doing a whole new campaign, and we're actually kicking off a whole big project. It'll be a cross-functional project that involves not only finance, accounts payable, all of our shared services, but we're bringing in sourcing, and we're bringing in the vendor master or operations teams. So we want to correct, some of our master data to make sure that we have the right terms in place. Maybe we don't. Maybe all those due upon receipt should not be there. There's some industry standards and companies out there that are going to net 45, net 60, net 90, even greater terms. Maybe that's something that we should look at. We're going to focus heavily on our suppliers as well. They need to understand how to do business with L'Oreal and respect our rules and our processes. All of this will ease really the burden of accounts payable, because at the end of the day, it's AP who's often left holding the bag. They're facing the suppliers, they're facing all of the questions on why they're not being paid. Management's asking about delayed payments as well. And I think we need to focus more on the upstream and the education to then finally improve and correct our pay on time.
That's great. Well, that's really great insight, Denise, and I think really practical for everyone on the webinar today. And I think a lot of people feel that pain point of being at the end of all the problems, that people look to you, whereas it's really important to get back upstream to solve the end-to-end process problems. So thank you for that. So with these benefits you've made, you've done a lot to get off paper, you've done a lot to automate and clean up this process. How have you seen your team change? Have you had any impact on your workforce with these automation changes?
Yeah, I think the team is definitely changing. The team is evolving. The team is able to focus really on some higher level tasks. So we've gotten rid of some of those very low level tasks. We, of course, talked about the paper and the incoming. We gladly no longer file. We threw away all of our filing cabinets. I think back to the beginning where our entire space was covered in filing cabinets. We had our annual party of transfiling all of those invoices every year to boxes, to sending them out to outside storage. All of that has gone away. We're saving money on the outside storages. We no longer have those costs. Everything is scanned. We don't retain the paper, and all of those ancillary functions are gone. And we're able to repurpose some of the staff. I think we've had some headcount reductions. We've had some efficiency there. But I think more importantly, we were able to repurpose some of the staff and put them on some more meaningful tasks, projects, things that we weren't able to focus on or get to prior. So overall, it's been a very, very positive change.
That's great, thanks. And for anyone on a similar journey, with all that you've been through, would you be able to share some advice and tips for anybody on a similar journey?
Sure, it's not an easy project, and it has taken us literally years to get all of our segments up and running, and we still have a lot to do. But you need to know what you want to achieve, have that clear vision, and you have to really bring your AP team in. They have a lot of good ideas. When you're going through the gap analysis, when you're going through the build phase, you really need someone who's strong in accounts payable so they can understand how these invoices are supposed to post, the types of invoices. Do you have POs? Do you not have POs? You need to build and envision how you want the flow to happen. Who are the people, if it's not buyers, perhaps you don't have 100% PO. What is the flow and where to go? I would also recommend starting small. Again, we did the top 20 vendors that had the largest volume in one segment. And we started really with just the scan that was our very first step. So 20 vendors only on scanning. And then we brought in, I think in 2 other phases, the rest of our vendor database onto scan. And then we transitioned to some of the EDI modules. It took a long time to train the scanning system. So I remember copying like thousands of invoices and sending them in, because you have to train the system to recognize your invoices, your vendors, and how to read those invoices. I can't stress like resources and support enough. It's a very technical setup. There's tables on the back end. The channels are different. The different IT teams to get involved, and focus on IDOC monitoring, right? So once the data starts from the vendor and it's transformed to IDOCs, for us, it hits many different partners. So even if it goes from Canon to TradeShift into our global scaped PI, you need a good monitoring system to make sure the flow is going from partner A to partner B. Partner B says, yes, I've received them. If I have 7,000 invoices coming in today, partner B says, yes, I received 7,000. And partner C says, yes, I received those same 7,000. We have had a lot of challenges with this, whether it was a file constraint or size constraint on the file, but no one was raising their hand to say, invoices didn't come in today. It wasn't until it got to my team and I had someone who monitors these flows still to this day, every day, but we're seeing it as the last partner in the chain. So all of a sudden, you know, everyone's many hours ahead of us. One of our flows goes through France. So we come in 7, 8 o'clock in the morning and there's no invoices. Well, this perhaps could have been solved by someone earlier up the stream. So I think that's very important. And one other thing to mention is clean up your master data. These are things that you can work on ahead of time. You need to have accurate supplier data on hand for communication, and also to target your desired vendors. This is things you can start working on now, even before the build. And then have a strong P2P process. If it's broken, the automation isn't going to fix it. And we struggled with that a little bit too, where we're mentioning our buyer compliance. So if you know, they're not compliant or you don't have a strong process in place, that's something you can work on ahead of time to make sure that's solid before you bring in the automation.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Shanice. Emmanuel, I'd just like to bring in you here again as well. I mean, with your experience working with other companies of different sizes and scale and scope, do you have anything else to add or maybe reiterate from this list?
Sure. So yeah, I think team coordination is really key here. When you got business teams, you got technical teams, you got integration teams, infrastructure team, and so on. So you need to have someone that works across all those teams, making sure that they're all working into the same direction. And on top of that, you need to have a great sponsor from the business client side. If there is no sponsor, the different teams are not, you know, progressing at the same pace. So it's very important that you get someone with a clear vision of the progress on each different streams, and then someone who can push and can accelerate or ask different teams to keep up the pace. So I think it worked pretty well with L'Oreal because also we are very close together, so we know each other together, and our teams are very well working with their own teams as well. So this is a key success factor for this kind of projects, because although it's a business project at the end, it's very technical, but it involves different teams from the technical side. So making sure that you guys have someone that coordinates all those different teams.
Well, thank you so much. So we will shortly be going to question and answer session. If you haven't yet submitted your questions to us, please do that so using the question functionality, which is again usually over on the right-hand side of your screen. and we can put your questions to Denise and Emmanuel. Before we do, I just want to say a few words about TradeShift, the company that have worked with L'Oreal, and I've seen them work with a number of other companies in the procure-to-pay space. TradeShift is 10 years old now, and I've seen them evolve quite a lot in the 8 years that I've been in the shared services space. TradeShift is a cloud platform, and they connect buyers and suppliers, digitizing the supply chain relationship. And like you've seen today, they facilitate the day-to-day procure-to-pay activity. They help companies from procurement through to financing and payment and all the complicated in-between stages. We've also written recently about some of the very interesting work they're doing on the leading edge of blockchain payments. Interesting to note about TradeShift is they are an open integration framework. So this means other companies and customers can integrate third-party apps on the TradeShift platform. So that's my understanding, that if the technology isn't built in, or if there's alternative technology or functionality that you'd like to see, just like smartphones, TradeShift has third-party apps to help them deliver the best possible service. So if you want to speak to anyone of the TradeShift team, they have some great experts. And again, they'd love to speak to you. They've helped companies like L'Oreal, bigger, smaller companies as well. So please do get in touch. So with that, I'd like now to dive into the questions. We have a number coming through. So I'll go through, again, some people are asking about the presentation. This can be accessed on our website, www.sharespace.digital, and it'll also be sent to anybody who's registered today. So first one, Denise, a question about your EDI tool. Can you explain which EDI tool or module is being used, and how does the EDI file/system look like?
Okay, a little technical for me, but the EDI file, as I understand it, right, starts out as just data to begin with. So there's 810 and 820 is the names of the files that they come in. So they contain all of the information that's needed to post an invoice. So again, there's no paper. It's starting electronic from the beginning, flowing through the system, where this particular file then converts to an IDOC to speak to SAP and create a posting directly in SAP. So it's hands-off, there's no intervention, but it does require, from what I understand, some technical development on the supplier end. Emmanuel, I don't know if you can elaborate on that at all from a technical perspective.
Yeah, I mean, what you need an ADI translator. So you got different vendors offering that kind of software. So you receive the EDI, which is something very structured from the vendor. So obviously the vendor, as you said, Dennis, has already invested into delivering the invoice message under this specific standard format. So you get that into your EDI translator, and that is converted into an IDOC within SAP. So don't remember the name of the EDI translator at L'Oreal, but you can get any vendor for that.
That's great. Well, thank you for that insight. Denise, another question for you, and that's if you experienced any issues with the quality of information provided by the suppliers on their invoices, what was your approach towards improving that?
That's a good question. So when we built the tool, right, we set a bunch of rules to begin with. So for instance, when it comes in, it'll detect duplicates. So if there is a duplicate invoice that a supplier submits, it's going to be rejected on the front end, never even come into our systems. We have rules that say if the invoice doesn't total properly, it's going to be rejected on the front end. So it goes right back to the vendor that we can't accept it. You know, there's things such as future date, and you can customize this. So there was a time where we were not accepting future dated invoices. We've since changed that because some of the leasing companies will date it the first of the month. But you can set those acceptance and rejection rules right from the beginning. You can also coordinate in the cockpit how you want things to flow. So one thing where the supplier is not compliant is they're not referencing the purchase order on the invoice. So if it comes in, purchase order field is blank, it'll show up in our cockpit with a 99999. So of course, no other data can be mapped to that. We don't even know what supplier it is because the unique reference of the PO is not there. But we chose to accept those in, and then accounts payable will do their due diligence and research and try and find the purchase order. It could be that the vendor did not put it on and we did have one. It could be that the buyer never raised the purchase order and went and contracted outside of our policies with the supplier, who then billed us, and then it becomes a follow-up of accounts payable.
Thank you, Denise. I think that really answers that question. So appreciate your insight there. Another person asking you, Denise, is what was your level of PO penetration before automation?
Before automation, so PO penetration meaning
I guess your
a requirement.
PO rates.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So when we first started, we had a threshold of $300 where no PO was required. And we found that we spent more time chasing some of these small dollar invoices because it kind of went back to, I'll call it the olden days, or the manual way where you would have someone sign, code an invoice, bring it back in, accounts payable would enter it. We then changed to 100% PO. So even if you had a very, very small invoice, a PO is required. It wouldn't require any approval to create the PO, but it gave us that link throughout the system. For me, that was key, and that's what's going to help accounts payable is to have the purchase order throughout. Buyer compliance, supplier compliance, and if you have overall within your company the mandate to have the purchase order, it's going to really complete the flow end-to-end seamlessly.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up question I'll just tie in here from someone else. Is they're asking if the PO match rate after automation, what that looked like. So it sounds like your PO rates were high. Were the matching process going smoothly?
The matching process is going very smoothly. So again, we send referential files out, so as part of our outbound files. So it contains everything related to that purchase order. So once the invoice inbound recognizes that purchase order, it does a full match. It brings in all of the other data. You do have some decisions to make as if you want a header match or like a high-level global match or a PO line item match. But yes, we have very good rates on the PO matching.
That's great. And have you brought in, so a bit of a different question here on procurement. Have you brought in like procurement to help your buyer team, like you said, involved to help them improve your supplier onboarding rates and the e-invoicing rates?
We started, purchasing is always involved, to a certain extent. We need to do a better job with that. So we started last year as an official project to then onboard and elevate our EDI rates. So we brought procurement in, but they really had kind of a backseat role. So now we are going to do a reboost of this starting April 6th, where we're really involving them heavily because we need them to go out to the suppliers and almost mandate that they get on one of these tools. EDI again, preferably. So it's the procurement teams who have the relationship with these suppliers. We tried to handle it in finance and a lot of our emails and solicitations, and we have trade shifts sending out emails as well and how-tos. They're just falling on deaf ears and no one's even responding. So procurement is key. We plan on doing that and really making them, I guess, the primary contact to go out and solicit certain suppliers to get them onboarded.
Thank you. Thanks for more insight into that, Denise. Again, a few more questions for you since you're handling them so well at the moment. So Denise, how does your approval process work for non-PO invoices with this automation? I guess you said you were mandating POs, but do you have some non-POs still?
We do not really have non-POs. We have one segment that is not on our SRM or My Market PO system. So again, we went to 100% PO to make it easier. But what we do with this particular group is they have purchase orders, but it's a separate standalone system for our research and development teams. So they're buying some raw materials and things for testing, and they use this outside system. So the invoice will come in through our cockpit, and it's referencing this standalone PO system. So I have one AP person who gets all of those, right? So they separate it in the cockpit based on that special PO number. And through that workflow tool, goes back to the buyer and says, give me the coding. So they actually give like the full account assignment. And then AP is manually entering that account assignment. But we're going to change that, I'm thinking probably around July, where we're going to import the information from that standalone system into our current SRM/My Market PO system so that it's fully integrated and we can eliminate those manual steps.
Thank you so much, Denise. Well, we're nearing the hour, so I think I'll make this the last question. Did you notice any improvement on the query resolution process after automation, i.e. less queries from suppliers regarding payment status, etc.?
Yes and no. So TradeShift does have in their tool where the supplier can go in and see some information. Our payments are still a little delayed, mostly due to really some in-house problems, challenges, and non-compliant behaviors, which we're focusing on. So I think overall it probably went down a little bit, but not as much as we were expecting. So these are things that we need to focus on and really perfect. And then we should see those inquiries drop.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Denise, and thank you, Emmanuel, for a fantastic presentation. Really learned a lot, and we had some fantastic questions. So thank you to Team TradeShift. Thank you for everybody who's tuned into the webinar today, for your participation in the polls and the questions. Everyone's been brilliant today. Just want to bring your attention. We have a few other events and webinars. We got some other great case studies, mostly on accounts payable, but also on some working capital order to cash subjects. We would love to see you there. Thank you again to everybody who's participated today, and we look forward to welcoming you next time. Thank you and goodbye.